Well, we've come to an interesting chapter. Not that the others aren't interesting. Most chapters of the Bible are interesting in various ways, but this one's got Melchizedek in it. And boy, the theories that you can hear about Melchizedek. And in some variants of Christianity, like the Latter-day Saint movement, they make a lot out of this Melchizedek chapter. Like a lot of very unusual ideas get said by different people at different times. I feel like it's much more down to earth than much of that. Anyway, let us read and we'll see what we get out of it. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of God Most High, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham divided a 10th part of all, being first by interpretation a king of righteousness, and then also king of Salem, which means king of peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Now, consider how great this man was, to whom even Abraham, the patriarch, gave a 10th out of the best plunder. They indeed are the sons of Levi, who receive the priest's office, have a commandment to take tithes from the people according to the law. That is, of their brothers, though these have come out of the body of Abraham, but he whose genealogy is not counted from them has accepted tithes from Abraham and has blessed him who has the promises. But without any dispute, the lesser is blessed by the greater. Here, people who die receive tithes, but there, one receives tithes of whom it is testified that he lives. We can say that through Abraham, even Levi, who receives tithes, has paid tithes, for he was yet in the body of his father when Melchizedek met him. Now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people have received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, and not be called after the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, there is of a necessity that a change also be made in the law. For he of whom these things are said belongs to another tribe, for which no one has officiated at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord has sprung out of Judah, about which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning priesthood. This is yet more abundantly evident if after the likeness of Melchizedek there arises another priest, who has been made, not after the law of a fleshly commandment, but after the power of an endless life. For it is testified, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. For there is an annulling of a foregoing commandment because of its weakness and uselessness. For the law made nothing perfect, and a bringing in of a better hope, through which we draw near to God, inasmuch as he was not made priest without the taking of an oath, for they indeed have been made priests without an oath, but he with an oath by him that says of him, the Lord swore and will not change his mind, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. By so much, Jesus has become the collateral of a better covenant. Many indeed have been made priests, because they are hindered from continuing by death. But he, because he lives forever, his priesthood is unchangeable. Therefore he is also able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, seeing that he lives forever to make intercession for them. For such a high priest was fitting for us, holy, guiltless, undefiled, separated from sinners, and made higher than the heavens, who doesn't need, like those high priests, to offer up sacrifices daily, first for his own sins, and then for the sins of the people. For he did this once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men as high priests who have weakness, but the word of the oath which came after the law appoints a son forever who has been perfected. All right. So we've got a bit more on Melchizedek here. And there's some crazy thoughts that go around about Melchizedek. Some people Well, I guess one of the common ones, which isn't that crazy, is that Melchizedek is a Christophany. Christophany means kind of like where it's Jesus himself, but in the Old Testament, like actually as a person. So there was another story where Abraham, where the Lord sent a messenger, 3 angels, to visit Abraham to tell him that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, a lot of people think that those 3 angels was actually Jesus and 2 angels. They think that was a Christophany and there were 2 angels with him. So Christophany is kind of like an appearance of Jesus in the Old Testament, or in history. Well, some people think that this Melchizedek is a Christophany. And Melchizedek, I Googled because I thought, is there some kind of historical information about Melchizedek apart from the Bible? And the reason why I thought that would be interesting was because if we had historical information outside of the Bible, then we'd know for sure he was just a regular person that lived, and so then we would know for certain that he's like just a picture of Christ, like a type of Christ, but not actually a Christophany. But, well, I couldn't find any. So we can't rule out completely that this was a Christophany. However, I personally feel that the Melchizedek of the Old Testament was an actual person who was actually the king and was actually the priest as well in this town called Salem, which a lot of people feel is Jerusalem. So the thought is that there was a real person who was really the king and really the high priest in Salem, and he's like a picture of Christ. And probably, almost certainly, worshipped the right God, the same God that Abraham worshipped. And so Abraham comes to the greater man and gives him a tithe. And in that story in Genesis, he also brings out bread and wine. Now that's definitely a picture of Jesus, not mentioned here. The bread and wine isn't mentioned here. But that's something that Jesus does. He gives bread and wine at communion. So the thought is that he is just a person, but a person who's a picture of Christ. And so because of that picture, we have this lesson to learn. But some people they're not happy with that idea that Melchizedek's just a picture, because in Hebrews here, which we've just been reading, it says that he was without father. This is verse 3. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, a priest continually. So the thought is that he's some kind of like eternal being. If you don't have a mum and you don't have a dad and you don't have a genealogy and you weren't born and you didn't die, what else could you be but Jesus? So it goes the thought. And so the obvious example here is that in the Bible, his father and mother are not recorded. His birth and his death are not recorded. His genealogy is not recorded. He's just in that one story, and it's not like Aaron. With Aaron's high priest, the details of his family are recorded. The genealogy is recorded. His sons are recorded. There's a list of all the high priests one after another. It's all there. He's not a priest continually. He did his turn, then the next generation did their turn. So we've got these comparison of these 2 high priesthoods. One high priesthood, we see the genealogy and the generations and the temporariness of it. The other genealogy, the other high priesthood, it's just a person. There's no mention of genealogies. There's no mentions of father or mother, how he was born, how he died. So the way it's described is described as a permanent priesthood. So it's like that. Jesus is after the order of that, the permanent priesthood, who's also a king, who's also the king of Salem, which means the king of peace. And by the way, Melchizedek or Melchizedek is Hebrew. Melchi means king and Zadok means righteousness. So his name actually means king of righteousness, which definitely sounds like Jesus. And Salem, Jerusalem, means peace. Shalom is peace. Salem is peace. So this Melchizedek is a king and a priest, but he's also the king of a city called Salem, which means peace. So he's the King of peace and also the King of righteousness. It's very much a picture of Jesus. So my understanding is that the way Melchizedek is presented in the Bible is as presented like a permanent priesthood, and Jesus is said to be after the order of that. And Jesus, of course, is a permanent high priest. He himself doesn't have father or mother. He doesn't have a genealogy or beginning of days or end of life. I mean, he did die on the cross, but he was resurrected again and will have no end. And he is the Son of God, and he will be a priest continually. And it says that the lesser is blessed by the greater, and the lesser pays tithes to the greater. So with Levi, the Levite priesthood, tithes were brought to the Levites by the other Israelites, but all of them were the descendants of Abraham. But when Abraham brought tithes to Melchizedek, he was paying tithes to someone greater than himself. And in that sense, the Levites, because they're descendants of Abraham, they paid tithes to Melchizedek too, in a sense. In other words, Melchizedek is greater than the Levites in that sense. This chapter actually is got a lot in it. You need to kind of read it slow and think about every sentence. So Jesus, and it also says that that with a change of priesthood comes a change of law. So with the Old Covenant, which was the Old Covenant law, we had the Levitical priesthood. But now that we have a high priest, a new high priest, we have a change of law. And that's exactly what we get with Jesus. We get a new covenant. And it says here in verse 27 that Jesus has become the collateral of a better covenant. And it says that many people in the other way were priests, but they were hindered by dying. But because Jesus lives forever, his priesthood is unchangeable. So therefore, he's able to save to the uttermost. In other words, save completely, perfectly save those who draw near to him, because he lives forever to make intercession for them. So in other words, if you were expecting a high priest to save you, well, there aren't any high priests in the world now according to the Levitical method. They're gone. That system cannot save you. If you're Jewish in the world today, and say you're a Jewish person and you're listening to me, and the Judaism you have is not the Judaism that's in the Old Testament. The Old Testament Judaism had a temple or a tabernacle. It had high priests, and it had priests and sacrifices and temple ornaments like the Ark of the Covenant. And it had a system. Now, I argue that this system is pointing to Jesus. Once we had Jesus, we didn't need the system. But if you believe in if you believe in Judaism, the Judaism you have now is not the Judaism that God established. It's a changed form of Judaism. And it doesn't have those sacrifices, and it doesn't have those priests or that temple or tabernacle, etc. Here in Hebrews, it says that priests were hindered from continuing by death. And indeed that is the case. Because in that old system of Judaism, there are no priests left. They're all dead. And so they're hindered. Their help has stopped. But Jesus is a different type of priest. He's a permanent one. And it says he will live to make intercession for you continually, and he will save you completely. So there you go. The last verse of this chapter says, the law, this is the Old Testament law, appointed men as high priests who were weak. But the Son of God, Jesus, is a high priest who's been appointed, who has been perfect. Big difference. Father, I thank you for this chapter. Thank you for the high priesthood of Jesus. Thank you for the perfect intercession we have on our behalf. And now, Father, I pray that you'd help us to follow, help us to serve, help us to have big hearts for the call and the purposes of God. Amen.